Good morning, Morai v'Rabotai, V'ruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and we are on Daf Yud Gimel, Amud Bet, 7 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Daniel, Moshe, Ben, Farangis, Abraham, Rachel, Simcha Bat Nahid, Betoch Shar Cholei Yisrael. Today's Amud is also being learned, Leinu Nishmat, Shlomo ben Yaakov, that is Neshama should have an aliyah. This month's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Mahbubi and Shei families. It should be an ultimate zechut for all their mishpachot. Amen. Amen. So we are still amidst the Zeraim portion tucked away really in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, this few dapim that we had. And the last thing we discussed yesterday was the Shita of Rav Shimon Shazuri. Now, Abaye and Rava were disagreeing about giving masrot from one year on the other when it comes as pertaining to Pul HaMitzri, certain types of kitniot. They're not necessarily like fruits of the trees that they go after the chanatav when the sprout starts coming forth. And you see the blossoms, you can see the beginning of that, and that would be the beginning of Rosh Hashanah for the Maaser of Perot Ilan, right? And the Tfu'ah, we mentioned the produce, the wheat, barley, all of that goes after Shlish. Same is with Zetim, with the olives, you go after the third of their growth. We spend a lot of time proving that from the Psukim. But said the Gemara, when it comes to Kitniot, it's not like that. Because the way people harvest it, it really should be like vegetables. Vegetables goes after the harvest. We're going to discuss that today, how we know the vegetables go after the harvest. But the kitniot are different because they don't have the same exact season, so to speak, of harvest. You plant this kitniot together. We spoke about the sesame seeds, the poppy seeds, and all that. You plant them together. But when it comes time for taking them off the ground, they're not going to be ripened enough together. The time that they're ripened enough to be popping out of the shaft, so to speak, once you want to use them, is not the same time. So when do you draw the line exactly? And the Gemara said, well, it depends. They pick them up whenever they're ready. So as far as the masrot is concerned, it's not going to be after the kita, like it is by regular vegetation, but it is when? It's the harvest of themselves, but you can't say that it's going to be from different years, because now you have in the pile, you take today 5 of them, you put it in the pile. Tomorrow you take another 5, you put in the pile. So your pile could be from last year, before Rosh Hashanah, and also from this year, after Rosh Hashanah, right? And that's going to cause a problem. Says Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, no problem, because you know what you could do? By pulling, you could just mix them up, the pile. Then you have Tafshin Pei Hey over there, you have Tafshin Pei Vav over there, and from the mixture you take Maaser, just like your pile is a mix of Tafshin Pei Hey, Tafshin Pei Vav, your Maaser also is a mixture of Tafshin Pei Hey, Tafshin Pei Vav. Achamim disagreed with that. Says, no, you can't do that because en bila, right? That's the last thing we learned in Gemara. That Abaye wanted to suggest we should do the same thing with our poppy seeds and sesame seeds. And Gemara says you can't do that because Rav Shimon Shazuri, he is of the opinion that yesh bila, that means halachically we allow you to mix and then take from the mixture of different years, because we assume that if you had 40% from Tafshin Pei and 60% from Tafshin Pei Vav in your pile, in your subtotal of your produce, and now you're taking from it, we assume that the maaser that you take also is exactly the same, that it has 40% of Tafshin Pei, 60% of Tafshin Pei Vav. I'm just giving you an example. And therefore it's fine. Rabbi said, who says? Who says we do that? Maybe what you're going to take is not going to have 40% from Tafshin Pei, hey, he's going to have 60% from Tafshin Pei. You didn't evenly, so to speak, mix it and bila. You can't mix and assume that everything is the same in the mixture. And that prompted, this is like a Shas concept. Rav Shimon Shazuri holds, yesh bila, and Chachamim hold, ein bila, right? So that's how we ended the daf yesterday. This is what Rava said to disagree with Abaye.
Rabbi, but isn't the whole point of the whole mixture to negate years and dates and times? Just put it all together. That's going to be Meiser, and then the next stuff will be Meiser as it goes. So
correct, but you have the problem is in your pile you have 2 different years, and the halacha is right. Every year and year the pasuk says has to have its own maaser, right?
Right. So you're trying to fix that by just mixing it all together and then just meisering whatever you can, and then that's it, and then everything gets meiser. But yeah, it might not be because you're trying to fix a problem, right? The problem.
The question is, can you create such a problem lechatchila? That's the question. The question is, can I say that by masrot we go after lekita when I know by shum shemin, by poppy seeds and by sesame seeds and so on and so forth, when knowing that I'm going to be taking some of it off the ground in this year and some of it after Rosh Hashanah, which is considered next year, and now there are 2 years worth of these kidniot that I have to deal with as far as masrot. And Abaye says, well, no problem, because you could mix them and give from the mixture, even though that the pasuk says hayotazo shana shana, right? That every year's maaser has to be kept separately. You can't give from Tafshin Pei He and Tafshin Pei Vav and vice versa when it comes to maaserot, right? So Rav Shimon Shazir says, no problem, you can still give from the mixture and assume that the percentages are exactly so, and therefore you could do that. But that requires me holding yesh bila. That things get mixed evenly, right? So we could assume, for instance, we're going to see just in a moment that even Shmuel, who does not necessarily agree with the concept of yesh bila, he says, well, by yayin veshemen yesh bila. Why? Because liquids get mixed evenly in that way, right? But not by solids. And if you don't say yesh bila, then you are taking, if you have, let's give numbers to make it a little bit more tangible. If you have 100 pounds of Tafshin Pei He produce, right, in this pile, and 50 pounds of Tafshin Pei Vav, so how much grain of maaser from Tafshin Pei He do you have to take? 10. And 5 from Tafshin Pei Vav, right? Now, if I took this 15 pounds of maaser off, and Klapesh Maya Gali Hashem knows that there's no 10 pounds of Tafshin Pei He here, there's only 9 pounds. So it turns out that I gave 1 pound of maaser from Tafshin Pei Vav on Tafshin Pei He. You can't do that, because it has to be shana shana. Unless I say, no, the mixture, yesh bila, everything is equally done, and therefore you're good to go. Chachamim disagree with that, so therefore you can't do it. And that's why Rava told Abaye you can't say that when it comes to poppy seeds and sesame seeds, right? So says the Gemara. V'rabanan savri en bila. Now, we're going to get into a big problem, because says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, take a look, 6 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani said, in the name of none other than Shmuel. Now remember this for the next 5 minutes, because it's going to go back and forth in 3 different members of Shmuel. But here we are told, in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani, quoting Shmuel, Halachak Rabbi Yossi ben Kippar Shamar Mishum Rabbi Shimon Shezuri. Shmuel said, Halakha is like Rabbi Shimon Shezuri. which means yesh bila or en bila? Yesh bila. So Shmuel now holds yesh bila. Well, says, wait a second. That is the only thing that's not sayable. You know why? Because you know who says en bila? Shmuel. Shmuel himself says directly, black on white, en bila. Says the Gemara, matkif la Rabbi Zera, umiyama Shmuel hachi. Shmuel really said that? The halakha is like Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, indicating that yesh bila. Ve'hamar Shmuel. We know that Shmuel said clearly, la kol en bila chutz miyayin v'shemen. Nothing else has bila besides from yayin v'shemen. Liquids, wine, oil has bila, nothing else. So how can you say halakha Rabbi Shimon Shazuri? That's like a checkmate stira, right? The Gemara says, I'll explain to you how it works. Ishtamite hadam Shmuel, he missed a third member of Shmuel, which answers the question from the first to the second one. What is the third Shmuel? Hakol holech achar gmar pri. Shmuel holds everything, even by kitniot. Until now we said that by kitniot we don't go after gmar pri, right? Only by vegetables. Remember that? Shmuel holds no, even by kitniot you go after gmar peri. So therefore, let's pay attention to what happens. According to Shmuel, when you have this pula mitzri, this kitniot, and you have some of them that you planted obviously all of them together, right? You planted all of them together, and now you go after the lekita. Lekita was in different points. You did the lekita. The Gmar Peri was, so to speak, in a different time, but not necessarily like we said according to Hashrasha, right? Remember we said the Pula Mitzri zera'o lezera miksato ishlish tifnei Rosh Hashanah or miksato ishlish la'achar Rosh Hashanah en tormin maslin mize al ze, right? Because you can't do before and after. And we asked that, what is Hashrasha doing over here? You remember that? So over here, you can have different times, but the Lekita all is in the same year. So you have this pile of the Kitniot, and you had different levels of Hashrasha before and after Rosh Hashanah, and you have different times of Lekita, but all of the Lekita is in this year, after Rosh Hashanah, right? Even though the Hashrasha was some before Rosh Hashanah, some after Rosh Hashanah. Correct? So according to Shmuel, when is the time for the Maaser of all these? This year. Because he holds you go after Lekita. So he ends up paskening like Rav Shimon Shazuri, not because of the same reason. When he says to you, halakha Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, he's not saying it because of yesh bila. Remember, Rabbi Shimon Shazuri holds you go after Hashrasha. But I have another overriding concept saying that even though that in my pile over here, I have Tafshin Pei Het, Tafshin Pei Vav, based on Hashrasha, I still could take Maaser from both of this at the same time because of yesh bila. Because we assume that it's evenly mixed, right? And therefore, I could take Maaser from this. Shmuel holds en bila. If this was actually from different years, I would not have been able to do that. But I still could do from this. I agree with Rabbi Shimon Shazuri versus Rabbanan, who are sitting next to him, and say you can't do it. I say you could do it, but not because of the same reason as Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, but because of a different thing, because I hold you go after Lekita, and all of the Lekita was in this year. The Lekita of this, the harvest of this was all in this year. So therefore, I agree with Rav Shimon Shazuri that you could take Maaser from this pile, which the Hashrasha was in 2 different years, because we don't go after Hashrasha. We go after Lekita even by these items of the Kitniot, right? So that's the pshat. The third. So we have three Shmuels. Let's go review it quickly. One Shmuel says halakha Rav Shimon Shazuri. The second Shmuel says we go after lekita, and the third Shmuel says en bila. There's no bila unless by shemen and yain. And these three answer each other up from what we thought would be a stira. We thought, how in the world can Shmuel say halakha like Rav Shimon Shazuri when he clearly says en bila? And the only reason of Rav Shimon Shazuri is that you could do this pile of last and this year because he holds yesh bila. It's mixed. And the answer is, yes, he holds like Rabbi Shimon Shazuri that you could take maaser from this, but not because of the reason of Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, which is bila, but because he goes after harvest, and harvest of all these was in the same year. So according to Shmuel, these are not Tafshin Pei Hey, Tafshin Pei Vav. These are all Tafshin Pei Vav. And therefore you're good to go. Right? So now the Gemara is going to ask, why do you need three Shmuels over here? Can't you just say one or two Shmuel? Like, can we bargain about, like maybe you could make this, why does he have to say three different sentences? A, why does he have to say halakha Rav Shimon Shazuri? Just tell me, we go after Lekita and Chalas, right? It's a very misleading memorize, a very misleading sentence to say halakha Rav Shimon Shazuri. Well, you don't hold of the concept of Rav Shimon Shazuri. Why would you say it like that, right? Why do you have to say three different sentences? One, halakha Rav Shimon Shazuri, en bila ela b'shemen v'yayin, and also as linan batar lekita, that you follow the harvest, not the root taking root. Says the Gemara. Now we jumped ahead a little bit explaining, so I'm just going to read the three lines that we said outside. V'ha'amar Shmuel lekol en bila chutz miyayin v'shemen. The Gemara says, ishtamite adam Shmuel. The third line of halakha that Shmuel said is hakol holech achar gemar peri. Everything goes after the gemar peri. It goes after the finishing of the fruits. The alpha kitniot, Rashi says, the last Rashi, lo halchu bahen achar hashrasha. Even the kitniot we don't follow after the time that they took root, but after the time that they are prepared for harvest, right? That's Shmuel. Vesricha, the top line of the Gemara. And we need all three. All three Shmuels needed to be said exactly the way they were said. There's no mistake over here. If Shmuel would just stand up and say halakha Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, you know what would all of us would think? We would all think mishum de kasavar yesh bila. We would think the reason differentiating between Chachamim, Rabbanan, and Rabbi Shimon Shazuri is Rabbi Shimon Shazuri hold yesh bila, and Chachamim hold en bila. And if he would say halakha Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, we would say, oh, Shmuel holds yesh bila. So therefore, you can't just say that. He has to say en bila ela b'shemen v'yayin. He has to tell us clearly that there's no bila in other items besides from oil and wine. Says the Gemara. Therefore, you need to say the second Shmuel, lekol en bila ela b'shemen v'yayin. And if Shmuel would just say this line, he would get up and say, Rabotai, lekol en bila ela b'shemen v'yayin. If he would only say that, then havabina k'Rabbanan. We would say, oh, he holds exactly like Rabbanan. So what happens by this pile of Tafshin Pei, Tafshin Pei Vav by Kitniot? You can't do it, we would think he says, right? Because of En Bila. So therefore you need the third Shmuel to say, no, everything goes after Gemar Peri, not after Hashrasha. In other words, he disagrees with Rabbanan, who hold by Kitniot, you go after the time they took root. He holds, you go after harvest. Chalas. So therefore he disagrees with Rabbanan. He holds like Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, lehalacha, right? Sivir kamash malan, halacha Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. V'yashmoin and halitarti. The one says, okay, you can't say either of the three, I understand. Say two of them, right? Just say these two. Don't say hakol holech achar gemar peri. Just tell me halacha Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. And also tell me, Lakol yesh bila, en bila, ela, miyayin, chutz mishemen v'yayin. And I'll know that if he says, Halacha ke Rabbi Shimon Shezuri, while he holds there's no bila, it must be that he holds that you go after Lekita. There's no other way to understand it. So say those two, and don't tell me the third one, of Hakol Holech Achar Gemar Peri. Why do you have to spell out Hakol Holech Achar Gemar Peri? If you tell me the two controversial Shmuels, one that you could give from this on that, like Rabbi Shimon Shezuri, and the other one, En Bila, so I will know that when he paskins like Rabbi Shimon Shezuri, is not because of Yesh Bila, it's because of Hakol Holech Achar Lekita. I would have figured that on my own. So says the Gemara, V'yashmoinan Hakol Holech, V'yashmoinan B'hani Tarti. If you would say only these two, here, I skipped the line. I would say, well, like we thought in the beginning, right? We thought it's a stira between the two Shmuels, is a checkmate, remember? Before we said the third thing. You can't not say that the third one, because you would have thought that there's a stira between Shmuel, therefore you have to actually spell out what the reason is for him to follow the halacha of Rabbi Shimon Shezuri. So says the Gemara, and if you would only tell me Hakol Holech Achar Gemar Peri, if Shmuel would only tell me that by Kitniot we go after the completion of the process of growth and the time of harvest, then Hava Amina, I would have thought Afidu Tevuah Vezetim Nami. These are all the Rabbanan, right? The Kitniot is all the Rabbanan, the Maser. Maser Doraita is Dagancha v'tiroshcha v'yisharecha, right? It's produce, the grain, wine, and oil. That's Doraita, right? These are all the Rabbanan. So I would have thought, says the Gemara, if you would tell me, Hakol Holech Achar Gemar Peri, I would say, oh, he holds that even by Tevuah v'zetim, we go after Gemar Peri, while we spend the whole Amud saying that by Tevuah v'zetim we go after 1/3. You remember? If you go after Shlish. So therefore, we need him to say all three of the memories that he said. Kamash Malan, Halachak Rabbi Shimon Shezuri. Fine. Halachak Rabbi Shimon Shezuri, B'mai de Palik. In what he disagrees only, but not in other things. In other words, I am only saying Halachak Rabbi Shimon Shezuri in what he disagrees with Rabbanan, but not in the Gancha Tiroshcha v'Yisarecha. So says the Gemara, V'lashmoinan Hani Tarti. Tell me the two other Shmuels and don't tell me Lakol Yesh Bila. In other words, the Gemara says, why can't we do the best option so far? Tell me that Shmuel holds like Rav Shimon Shezuri. Also tell me that everything goes after Gemar Peri by Kitniot. And don't tell me Lakol Yesh Bila. Right? Why do I need that? Says the Gemara, Hakamash Malan de Leyayin Veshemen Yesh Bila. You're right. I would have known En Bila according to Shmuel, but I wouldn't know that he holds Yesh Bila by liquids, by Yayin Veshemen. So that's the chidush of the third member of Shmuel, to tell me that there are items that you could have Bila, that you could take from Tafshin Pehei and Vav mixed together when it's liquid and everything is evenly mixed together, then you could say Yesh Bila. Fine. So far we have the halacha of not just Tevuah, but we have also the halacha for Yayin Veshemen, and we have the halacha for the vegetables that you go after Shat Lekita, and we have the halacha for Kitniot, which is Machloket, by this whole poppy seeds and sesame seeds and so on. This Machloket, Rav Shimon Shezuri says, well, forget about Rav Shimon Shizuri. Chachamim say go after Shat Hashrasha, and we have those who argue and say we go after time of the Kita, and that is Shmuel. Okay? Says the Gemara now, Tanya, Rabbi Yossi HaGalili Omer, Be'osfecha mikornecha mikvecha. When the pasuk says Be'osfecha mikornecha umiyikvecha, ma goren ve'yekev meyuchadin shkedelin al me shana she'avra umit'asrin le'shana she'avra af kol shkedelin al me shana she'avra mit'asrin le'shana she'avra yas'u yerakot shkedelin al me shana haba. We mentioned that what's different than fruits and then other things is yerakot. Yerakot are vegetables, and vegetables we follow shat lekita. We go after the time they're harvested, not the time that they're planted, or not the time that they take root. Why? How do you see that? Where do you see, obviously, this is all midrabanan level, the psukim that we're going to darshin, the Gemara is going to bring is all the Rabbanan level because the Maaser is the Rabbanan by vegetables, right? But the Gemara says the reason that I know that we go after the time of harvest, a time of plucking it off the vegetables, is from this pasuk. The pasuk says, "Be'osfecha migornecha." When you gather your goren, your produce, and the indication that it has is in the language of the Gemara, and this is going to be a machloket Tanaim, so we have to be exact in the way the language works exactly. So it says the Gemara be'osfecha migornecha u'mikvecha, just like goren ve'yekev. Goren is grains, right? Goren and grain is pretty similar, right? And yekev is the wine. So by goren ve'yekev, by your grain and by the wine, says the Gemara, meyuchadin, they are special shegedelin al me shana she'avra. They grow on the water that they took from last year. Even for sure, the trees are like that. The trees, they already by Tu B'Shvat, they've taken all of the water of the rain, and now it grows based on the water. Even if you don't water the trees, there is already water enough in the roots and in the thing that the fruits are going to be growing. And same is with the grain that we mentioned before, that by shlish, when they have the third, by then they have taken enough water from the ground that the rest of it is going to grow. So they go after the water they took originally, right? Says the Gemara, just like they are like that, umit asrin de shana shavra, they go in masrot, they go after when they took the water from the ground, right? So it's shana shavra. By grain is when they brought the third shlish, and by wine is, even before that, by Tu B'Shvat already they took enough water. They go after the time that they took the water. Avkol shegederin alme shana she'avra. Everything else should follow the same pattern, and only things that they use the water of last year, their maaser is going to be based on when they were planted last year. But vegetables, they're not reliant on the water they took last year. Every day you have to have water for them now. And they're reliant on this water for their growth, and therefore they go after now, not after then. Yatz'u yerakot, it excludes the vegetables, shegedelin al me shana haba'ah. They need the water now, which is shana haba'ah, after Rosh Hashanah, and therefore mitasrin le shana haba'ah. They go after when you pluck them off the ground, which is shana haba'ah, is the next year, and it's not like the fruits of trees. Rabbi Akiva says something very similar, but different. Rabbi Akiva omer, be'osvecha migornecha u'mikvecha. When the pasuk says osvecha migornecha u'mikvecha, ma goren, just like goren ve'yekev, that means grain and wine. Shegedelin al rov mayim, that they grow on rov mayim, which is megashamim. Like the majority of the water that they take is from the rainwater, and that's sufficient for them. Rainwater is sufficient for Goren v'Yekev. They go after the time of their plantation or sprouting. Af kol shegedelina rov mayim. Anything that suffices with megashamim is going to be like them, giving masrot based on the time of plantation or beginning of the growth. L'shana she'avra yatzu yerakot, and it excludes yerakot, vegetables, that they are not reliant, is not sufficient for them. The rainwater, you need also to water them yourself, right? You have to draw water, give water to them. The Gemara's language for that is shegedelin al kol mayim. They need rainwater, but they need additional water. Kol mayim, all the waters that he give them, umit asrin l'shana ha'ba'ah, and therefore they are going to be tied based on the current year when you are actually plucking them off. What's the difference? Right. Rabbi Akiva and Chacham was the same thing. Rov mayim, kol mayim, right? What's the difference? Amar Rabbi Abahu, the difference is besalim haserisin upul hamisri. The difference is these two items. Besalim haserisim, and put a certain type of onions, and pula mitzri, certain type of kitniot. Why? Because the Mishnah tells us, "Besalim haserisin ditan, besalim haserisin upula misri, shemana mehem mayim 30 yom lifnei Rosh Hashanah." If you stop watering them 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, the halakha changes. It's amazing, right? Usually, these vegetables, you give maser based on the time you pluck them. If you stopped giving water 30 days ago to them, you pluck it after Rosh Hashanah, still the maser goes before Rosh Hashanah, based on previous year, not this year. Not like other vegetables. Why? Because you stopped watering them. But that only is according to Rabbi Yossi, not according to Rabbi Akiva, right? That's only according to Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi is the one that says it depends on the actual water that you provided for them. Rabbi Akiva says it depends on the type of the thing. A type of produce that is reliant on mega shamim versus something that you have to water it yourself. And this besalim asrisim are from the type that you have to water yourself. So according to Rabbi Akiva, the fact that you stopped watering it 30 days ago, it makes zero difference. Zero difference. If you pluck it today after Rosh Hashanah, you give maaser based on today after Rosh Hashanah. But according to Rabbi Yossi, if you stopped watering it, it didn't actually grow from the water of this year. It did all of its growth based on the water of the previous year. Then you actually follow the masrot of the previous year, and that's the little tiny difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yisraeli, but the rest of it really is the same. This brings us to the next Rosh Hashanah. Finally, we're done with this, and we're going to get into Be'echad B'Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan, the Machloket, Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, 2 B'Shvat, or Be'echad B'Shvat. It's going to be Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanot, Chag HaIlanot, which we're going to, Be'ezrat Hashem, discuss in the next shiur.